Imagine a staunch, completely committed atheist, like someone who firmly and unapologetically rejects the supernatural.
Right, someone who demands hard, empirical evidence for absolutely everything.
Exactly. Now imagine that exact same person getting on their knees every single night to pray and experiencing measurable psychological benefits from doing so.
It's a wild thought, because we usually treat belief as this strict binary.
Right. You either believe in a higher power or you're just a total skeptic. But what happens when that clean line in the sand gets completely washed away?
Well, we end up looking at a psychological landscape that really challenges our most basic assumptions about why human beings engage in spiritual practices in the first place.
And that is exactly the mission of today's deep dive. We are taking you on this exploration into the pure psychology of prayer. We're entirely stripping away the theology. To do this, we are unpacking the framework laid out by author Todd Murphy in his writings on the psychological wisdom of prayer. And let's be perfectly clear right out of the gate here.
No.
We're not taking sides on religion versus atheism. We're just acting as impartial guides, exploring these fascinating concepts to see what they might reveal about the human mind.
Because if you're listening to this right now, whether you are a devout believer or the ultimate skeptic, there is something deeply revealing about your own mind to discover here.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we strip away the divine entirely, how does Murphy actually define the act of prayer?
So he reframes prayer not as some supernatural event, but actually as an evolutionary cognitive skill.
Oh, really? An evolutionary skill?
Yeah, he views it as this sort of backup style of thinking. And it's something that exists in absolutely every human culture. But to understand the mechanics of this, we really have to look closely at the architecture of the human mind.
Right.
Specifically, how the two hemispheres of the brain operate and communicate with each other.
So we are talking about the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere.
We are. And we have to examine how each side generates its own distinct experience of reality. When evaluating this, it's really critical to focus on the concept of our senses of self.
Senses of self, plural.
Exactly. We actually possess two distinct senses of self, with one residing in each hemisphere.
Okay, so the left hemisphere, that one is linguistic and linear, right? It processes one single thought or like one single word at a time.
Right, it's very sequential.
It is the internal monologue you hear in your head when you're reading an email or, planning out your day.
But the right hemisphere operates entirely differently.
Yeah.
It is completely nonverbal and nonlinear.
Because it doesn't use language in the same way.
Exactly. And it has direct access to the hippocampus, which means it's constantly pulling from this massive, silent database of memories. And it's continuously finding entirely new contexts for those memories. If the left hemisphere is a person speaking just one word at a time, the right hemisphere is processing information with this incredible subtlety.
Like what?
Well, Murphy compares it to the harmony and counterpoint in a complex Bach fugue. It takes in the whole picture simultaneously.
So think of it kind of like a computer system. The right hemisphere is this massively parallel supercomputer crunching millions of subtle contextual variables all at once.
Yes.
And the left hemisphere is just a single-threaded processor trying to output one logical sentence at a time. So when we pray, are we essentially just asking our own internal supercomputer for help?
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
Under normal circumstances, that single-threaded processor of the left hemisphere, it totally dominates our conscious awareness.
Right, because we're always thinking in words.
Exactly. But Murphy's theory introduces this core concept. Any technique that interrupts the normal day-to-day communication between the two hemispheres, it causes the left hemisphere to perceive the right hemispheric sense of self directly.
And because the left hemisphere is so rigidly linear and linguistic.
It doesn't recognize this profound nonverbal intelligence as me. It literally interprets it as an external spirit or an entity or a visitor.
Wow. So when a person is in deep prayer, they're essentially bypassing their own noisy single-threaded processor.
Yep, that's the psychological framework. Prayer offers this alternative way of thinking that lets the believer feel like a higher being can offer them help.
But that higher being is actually just the expression of their own right hemispheric sense of self.
Exactly, and by projecting it outside of ourselves, it circumvents the fear, the anxiety, the sadness, and even the lowered self-esteem that so often comes up when a person's really frightened or in pain.
I mean, I can definitely see how that influences your brain's activity in a highly beneficial way.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if I'm in pain, my left hemisphere is trapped in this loop of neurotic anxiety, right? Just catastrophizing the future, step by step.
Playing out every worst-case scenario.
Yeah, so by projecting the problem outward to a perceived visitor, I bypass that panic entirely and just tap into my own deeper wisdom.
That's the idea.
But I do have a major hurdle with this.
Okay, what is it?
Well, if this entire process is just an internal psychological interaction between our own hemispheres, how do we explain all those decades of scientific studies trying to measure intercessory prayer?
Praying for others.
Right. Scientists have spent years trying to treat prayer like a clinical drug in these randomized trials, measuring if praying for sick people actually cures them.
Yeah, and the clinical approach to studying prayer is deeply flawed. Decades of double-blind randomized studies on intercessory prayer consistently fail to show results.
Yeah, they just don't work.
No, they don't. And Murphy explains exactly why this happens. In a strict scientific study, researchers will assign people to pray for randomized case numbers.
Like a spreadsheet.
Right. A participant is handed a list and instructed to say, "Lord, please help case number 108."
But wait, if we throw out double-blind studies, aren't we just throwing out the scientific method because we don't like the results? I mean, how do we separate this from pure placebo if we don't use strict controls?
Well, the argument is that you cannot effectively study a deeply complex psychological state using the exact same protocols you'd use for testing aspirin.
Okay, fair point.
Forcing someone to read a clinical script or pray for a sterile, anonymous number, it destroys the very psychological mindset required for genuine prayer. You're asking the linguistic left hemisphere to perform a rote task.
Which prevents the right hemisphere from engaging at all.
Exactly. However, when studies are not blind, when the people praying actually know the names and faces of those tias, their praying for the data shifts dramatically.
Really? How so?
Murphy points to specific studies showing significant improvements in patients with bloodstream infections when the prayers were directed by people who personally knew them. Yeah, in those cases, both the length of the hospital stay and the duration of the fevers were notably shorter than the control group. What's fascinating here is that studying prayer with strict protocols is basically like telling a psychic to prove their skills by guessing the World Cup winner.
Right.
It is just a very naive approach to how the phenomena actually works. It treats prayer as a direct chemical intervention rather than a deeply nuanced psychological and emotional state.
See, I still struggle a bit with the methodology there, though, because a truly compassionate person is going to pray for the control group too, regardless of what the scientist tells them to do.
Right, they aren't going to hold back.
Exactly. If I'm participating in a prayer study, I'm not going to say, please heal the test group, but make sure to completely ignore the control group. That violates the fundamental premise of compassion that drives the prayer in the first place.
And you are hitting on the exact problem. You simply cannot tightly control the parameters without fundamentally destroying the phenomenon you're trying to study.
So, if the effectiveness of prayer relies on this emotional, nonverbal connection rather than a clinical script, what happens when language isn't a factor at all? Like, does this framework apply to animals?
It actually does. There is a fascinating study involving injured bush babies. They're a type of small primate, like a lemur.
Okay.
Researchers found that these injured bush babies recovered from their physical wounds much more quickly, and they even exhibited healthier social grooming behaviors when humans were actively praying for them.
Wait, human prayer affecting the wound recovery of lemurs?
Yeah.
That seems to push this way out of the realm of internal hemisphere communication and into something external. How does Murphy's psychological framework even account for that?
He theorizes it involves an evolutionary trait of brain-to-brain communication.
Brain to brain.
Yeah. It might be a deeply ingrained survival mechanism we share with other primates. This ability to send and receive nonverbal psychological signals.
So not language.
No, not at all. In human beings, our incredibly dominant, language-heavy left hemisphere has largely supplanted this subtle ability. But the idea is that in states of deep focused prayer, we might still tap into those primal, nonverbal psychological signals.
That is wild. So, if strict clinical protocols ruin the emotional suspension of disbelief required for prayer, it sounds like intellectual agreement and true faith are operating on completely different neurological hardware.
They absolutely are.
Yeah.
And the neurology behind this distinction is stunning. When you look at how the brain processes belief versus disbelief, you literally see two entirely different systems at work.
How so?
Well, studies show that when people listen to statements from someone they truly believe has healing powers, it actively deactivates the ventral medial prefrontal cortex.
Okay, and for the listener, the ventral medial prefrontal cortex is basically your brain's fact checker.
Exactly.
It's the region you engage when you're doing your taxes or solving a logic puzzle or, analyzing a really complex argument.
And when you experience genuine faith, your brain literally powers off that fact checker.
It just shuts it down.
Yep. Conversely, when a person engages in active disbelief, like when they're presented with a concept, they strongly reject it, engages a completely different brain region called the anterior insula.
Wait, the anterior insula, isn't that the same area of the brain that processes physical pain?
Yes,
Yeah.
the exact area that processes physical pain and visceral disgust.
Wow.
Which tells us that disbelief is not just some neutral logical calculation. It is a visceral emotional rejection.
That makes so much sense.
Evolutionarily, it makes perfect sense. For early humans, rejecting a shared tribal belief could mean exile from the group.
Which almost certainly meant physical death.
Right, so the brain evolved to process fundamental disagreement as an actual physical danger. This demonstrates that faith is not simply intellectual agreement with a set of theological facts. Faith is a feeling.
It's like romantic love. If you sit there critically analyzing whether your feelings for your partner are true or false based on some spreadsheet of their behaviors, that skepticism immediately corrupts the romance.
Oh, totally.
You just have to suspend your disbelief and experience the emotion for the love to be real.
And that mechanism works in all directions. Skepticism and the hatred of religion often act out an emotional response to conflicting beliefs, rather than a purely logical one.
Give me an example.
Well, Murphy highlights the example of an atheist who becomes intensely, visibly angry at the mere concept of an afterlife.
Okay.
If you ask them why they are so angry, they'll claim they just despise seeing people led away from the truth.
Right, defending logic.
But that level of anger is an emotional reaction triggered by the anterior insula, not a logical deduction. Fundamentalism and that aggressive psychological need to be right, it exists equally in both science and religion. Both extremes can blind you to the nuanced beauty of the human experience.
So, if experiencing faith requires us to suspend our critical thinking and maybe even abandon our pursuit of objective truth, why did human beings evolve to do this? Like, what is the evolutionary benefit of powering down the fact checker?
Because evolution does not favor objective truth. Evolution favors survival and adaptation. Being able to access a state of calm, deeply intuitive problem solving is a massive evolutionary advantage. Prayer actively helps people deal with profound trauma.
Are there studies on that?
Yeah, consider a major study looking at victims of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. The data showed that engaging in prayer actively decreased their symptoms of PTSD.
Wow.
Meanwhile, spending time keeping up with the news about the disaster did not help them at all. In fact, it likely exacerbated their stress.
Well, sure, watching the news just feeds anxiety loop with more linear, terrifying data.
Exactly.
While prayer forces a pause on that data intake and accesses a nonlinear comfort. But I want to be really careful here because just calling this a simple coping mechanism feels pretty reductive.
Oh, it is reductive. We need to be highly precise with our language here.
Yeah.
It is not just a trick to feel better.
Right.
It is a mechanism that helps us psychologically in times of trouble, but also makes it easier for us to find alternative ways, and let's call it styles of thinking.
I like that phrasing.
It initiates this powerful psychological cascade. Praying more frequently leads to a belief that a higher power mediates health. That belief generates increased optimism, which ultimately results in a genuinely better perception of one's own health and resilience.
So what does this all mean? The author is essentially arguing that objective truth is paramount when you're doing science or engineering, right? Like, you absolutely want objective truth when you are building a bridge. But an unfettered sense of subjective truth is often far superior for navigating the subjective pain, grief, and uncertainty of human life.
Which brings us to the ultimate and perhaps most radical conclusion of Murphy's work. How an atheist, someone who entirely rejects the objective reality of a deity, can actively harness this evolutionary tool without compromising their intellect.
See, I have been wrestling with the practical application of this. If I know intellectually that there is no deity, the second I try to pray, my left hemisphere is just going to call out the hypocrisy.
Right, that feels fake.
Yeah. How does an atheist actually pray without feeling completely absurd?
Well, the primary rule is about projection. If you attempt to pray while simultaneously reminding yourself God is just a concept in my brain, the practice will fail completely.
Because I pray to myself is absurd in literally every tradition.
Exactly. You must project the presence outside of yourself to unlock the right hemisphere's insights.
Because if you keep it inside, you're just talking to your own anxious, single-threaded processor. You're trapping yourself in the left hemisphere.
Yes. So atheists who want to utilize this psychological tool must practice pretending the feeling, not the belief.
Pretend the feeling.
Right, you can treat the presence as an invariable friend. Or, alternatively, you can use a physical object like a statue of Shiva or the Virgin Mary purely as a focal point for your imagination.
Just as an anchor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't have to believe the physical object has magical powers. You're simply using it to anchor your focus outside of your own head.
The sources mention this really fantastic quote from the scientist Candace Pert. She's the researcher who discovered opiate receptors.
Oh yeah, I love this quote.
When she was asked if she believed in God, she replied, "Yes, I believe in God. I'm a member of a species that believes in God."
That perfectly captures the necessary psychological posture. It is just a recognition of our own psychological architecture. And to activate that architecture effectively, Murphy suggests that atheists use well-structured prayers.
And notice we are saying well-structured, not rigid structure. It is really about creating a predictable container for the mind.
Right, because ritual demarcates a sacred space and intentionally shifts the mood. The sources reference the novena to St. Philomena.
Who is that?
Historically, she is a Catholic saint, known practically only by the iconography on her tomb, a lily, arrows, an anchor, and the lance. Yet, the structured prayer dedicated to her, repeated over 9 days, combines formal recitation with a designated space to insert your own personal intentions.
Oh, interesting.
You can also look at the rosary, which incorporates physical beads, tactile sensation, and vocal repetition. These structured practices give the linear left hemisphere a repetitive, safe task to chew on, which then allows the right hemisphere the freedom to open up and connect.
You essentially distract the single-threaded processor with a repetitive task so the supercomputer can finally boot up and run in the background.
Exactly. The key to making this function as an atheist is adhering to the old biblical advice. Let your left hand not know what your right hand does.
I love that.
You must consciously allow a gap to exist between your logical, scientific understanding of the universe and your emotional, subjective experience of yourself.
You basically have to give yourself permission to be beautifully, functionally illogical for maybe 15 minutes a day.
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, humans just didn't evolve to be perfectly rational, truth-seeking machines. We evolved to survive complex, threatening environments. Letting go of stress and accessing our deeper intuition feels good because it is highly adaptive. When we utilize structured prayer, we're not tapping into magical signals from the cosmos. We are unlocking our own deepest, nonverbal psychological intelligence.
This means that whether you are a devout believer kneeling in a centuries-old cathedral or, a staunch atheist experimenting with an invisible friend in your living room, the act of prayer taps into a very similar nonlinear intelligence within our own right hemisphere.
It really does.
It just offers this profound evolutionary way to navigate life's inevitable challenges.
It acts as a remarkable bridge between the worlds of strict skepticism and deep spirituality. And it leaves us with one final, lingering thought to consider.
What's that?
Murphy discusses the concept of pareidolia. This is the deeply human psychological tendency to look up at a random formation of clouds and see faces or distinct shapes.
Right, because our brains are desperate to find meaning, structure, and recognizable patterns even in completely random visual data.
Exactly. Our linguistic left hemisphere is relentlessly trying to force logical structure onto a chaotic world. But if the psychology of prayer is fundamentally about pausing that strict logic, this raises a vital question for you to mull over.
Let's hear it.
If we spend our entire lives demanding literal, objective truth, what brilliant nonverbal insights are we missing every single day, simply because our left hemisphere refuses to look at the clouds and just feel the presence of the unknown?
Man, that is a great thought, because at the end of the day, whether you call it a deity, a visitor, or just your own internal supercomputer, that profound intelligence is in there, just waiting for you to simply stop talking and start listening. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning, keep looking at the clouds, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.